Ottawa is a city accustomed to protests and big gatherings on Parliament Hill, but what's currently happening there is unprecedented, as protesters calling themselves a Freedom Convoy have created encampments and are refusing to leave. Joanne Chianello is the city affairs analyst for CBC Ottawa, and she's been covering this story since it began nearly 2 weeks ago. She joins us now from the downtown core of the nation's capital. And Joanne, as always, great to see you again. How are you managing?
Thanks for having me. Weirdly, it's starting to seem normal to have all of these trucks downtown, and I'm not sure that that's really a good sign.
I hear you. Well, almost 2 weeks in, how would you characterize the mood of the protesters today as opposed to when this started?
This started like 2 weekends ago, and it was sort of a party, jovial mood, right? And a lot of people thought, including police, including the city, that it was going to be a weekend affair, that maybe some diehards were going to stay, but that was going to be it. They were going to go. That is obviously not the case. Last time we heard there were 400 or so trucks in the downtown core spilling, diesel fumes, honking their horns until very recently. There was lots of reports of people in the neighborhood being harassed. And right now where we are is, I would say, at a tense standoff, trying to see what is going to happen next. Police have announced a huge increase in policing and security. They've asked for 1,800 people. I think both protesters are wondering when that police force is going to come in, what's going to happen. And as we're approaching another weekend here, weekend number 3, I think that the residents are thinking, are we going to be seeing yet again thousands more protesters come back into the city? So people are really wondering, what is the next step here?
How organized versus organic does it all seem right now?
The protesters are super organized. Last weekend I went to the camp. They call it the Coventry camp because it's you would appreciate this, Steve. It's the local baseball stadium owned by the city, and it's on Coventry Road. And the parking lot there had been used to park some of these vehicles on the first weekend. The idea being, let's take some of these trucks out of the downtown core, put them, at this parking lot. And then, they were going to be leaving Sunday night. But in fact, what they did was they quickly moved into sort of setting this camp up as a supply camp. There was fuel there. There's food, tents. They brought in some saunas to keep themselves warm. And the city has had trouble moving them out of there. In fact, it was only last Sunday night that there was a massive police raid there to actually remove some fuel. And so, I think people have been very surprised by how highly organized this protest was. There are truckers here. They've been here for almost 2 weeks. They're being fed. They're being given fuel. And there's, the ability for people to, the protesters to communicate with themselves, amongst themselves, I should say, has been quite impressive, actually, on a logistical scale, to be honest.
That police raid that you just referenced, how successful or not from a law enforcement point of view was it?
I was actually at it. Actually, it's not something I usually do. I'm usually covering, City Hall and legislature. So it was there. And I think it did 2 things. One thing is, there's been a lot of criticism that police have not been enforcing the laws. People wanted to see more active policing. They will tell you they're just trying to keep things under control. And I should say, we haven't seen any riots here. We haven't seen any really serious injuries or deaths. That is not to say that crimes have not been committed and there hasn't been other problems. But on that scale, it has been a success. But people have said, look, where is the enforcement? And what you saw Sunday night at this baseball stadium parking lot was a very, very obvious use or a display, I would say, of police power. There were rows and rows and rows of police, heavily armed in their riot gear, coming in. Dozens of trucks came in, fire, ambulance. They came, they took a fuel tank away. And so that had also, in a practical sense, the supply camp had lost their fuel that they were transporting to those to the protesters who were downtown. But I also think it also served to demoralize them a little bit as well. Now, they are regrouping the protesters, and they say they're still going to keep going. But it was actually one positive step forward, but it certainly has not ended the protest by any means.
No, and having said that, we did see the Ontario Liberal leader the other day come out and say, it's enough already. We need to start seeing arrests. We need to start seeing tow trucks coming in and simply taking vehicles away from their owners. handing out.
Stephen Del Duke is actually in town today. He's the first leader actually to come and the first provincial leader to come and visit the protests. Yes.
He's not meeting the
But
protesters, though, is he?
I'm not. I didn't see him, but I think he's meeting with residents. No,
Yeah.
no, he's not here to negotiate. But I think he's here to reach out to the residents of Ottawa. It being an election year, as you know.
Indeed, and therefore, I mean, the residents have got to be at their wits' end by this point. I know the
Sure.
horns aren't honking as much now as they once did, but still, people can't get into businesses. They can't get into they can't leave their homes in many cases.
No, it's terrible.
Yeah, give us some more flavor of what's going on there.
I just go back. I didn't mean to interrupt you there because you were saying that yes, Steve Del Duca has said it's time to tow trucks out and things like that. This is not it's not as if people have not thought of that. Of course, they have. It is not that easy. For example, I heard from the Ottawa city manager. They have lots of tow truck companies on retainer. The city does. They have all refused to go in to do this work. Not only is it logistically difficult if the driver doesn't want to how should I say it, cooperate. But it's also, we're having trouble finding companies that are willing to go in there because either they don't want to upset big trucking companies who they get their money, their work from, or they're afraid, frankly. So it's not that simple. As well, we heard the protesters downtown, about a quarter of them have children with them. And so it's not something you want to go in all guns blazing, right? You want to make sure that people are not hurt when you do this. And it is getting smaller day by day, but of course people are losing their patience. A lot of people want it to end all at once. We also hear that, there's a new convoy of trucks maybe coming in this weekend. And this is the other thing people are braced for. The last 2 weekends, we've had sort of the weekend warrior types come in. Some of them have just been partiers. And, last weekend, you probably saw the pictures of bouncy castles on Wellington Street and barbecues. So part of it is sort of fun, but another part of it has sort of a menacing atmosphere. We've had Randy Hillier, who, of course, was the MPP who's been kicked out of the PC caucus here, telling people this is the hill to die on, don't go. And so, again, it seems to be heading in the right direction towards ending it, but it is not there yet. And people are worried about the next steps. The residents are worried about the next steps that protesters might make.
Well, no disrespect to Mr. Hillier, but he's hardly the highest profile politician or ex-politician to make hay with this. I mean, for goodness sakes, Donald Trump mentioned it the other day. This story's all over American cable television. What do people in Ottawa make of all of that?
Well, it's not great, right? I mean, we're usually thought of as boring. I mean, I think people would we'd love to be known again as the town that fun forgot, right? I mean, this is Ottawa is a capital that is known for, having a nice big Canada Day party. We never make the international news almost ever. And now I think we'd like to go back to that. It seems, and it's certainly also been seen as a catalyst for other protests. This is not something, again, that people are happy about. And also, it also brings up it has questions about how well Ottawa can be managed, right? And I think this is going to be a big story afterwards. Already we're seeing calls for inquiries as to how was this allowed to get to this stage, this kind of protest? But now people are worried that we're seen as someone who cannot manage our own security, and that's not a great thing.
Joanne, maybe just one more comment on Prime Minister Trudeau. We noticed that he took part in that emergency debate that took place in Parliament the other day. He's between a rock and a hard place in some respects. He's not going to go meet the protesters. Some people want him to meet the protesters, but obviously that's not about to happen. Is there anything that people think he ought to be doing right now vis-a-vis this demonstration that he hasn't done yet?
Well, everyone's an expert on how to end this demonstration. That's one of the things you realize when you start reporting things. But of course, there's two ends of the spectrum, right? One is send in the army, use all the national force you have. That's not going to happen. As you know, the laws around that are very specific, that you only use it in a national army in a national emergency if there is rioting. And he has said, and I think rightly, that you want to be very careful when you are sending in Canadian Armed Forces against Canadians. On the other end of the spectrum, I think some people think that the Prime Minister could speak out more to some people. There are some people who are just here because they don't believe in this laws. They don't believe in the COVID restrictions. They're here to protest that, and that is something they are allowed to do. And I think that the Prime Minister maybe could have gone a little farther in saying, people who are looking to overthrow the government or or trying to start fires in apartments or harassing residents. I'm not talking to you. I'm not talking to you, but the rest of you who are there because you don't agree. I hear you. I'm your prime minister as well. Maybe you didn't vote for me. And we're going to have to try to figure out a way to talk to each other, because there is now a giant gap here. And I don't know how federal leaders are going to bridge that, provincial leaders too. But I think we have to, because there are a lot of people here who are obviously very upset, normal people who would never protest, who are here, who are not necessarily agitators. And I don't know if they feel listened to.
Joanne Chianello, CBC Ottawa. Always good of you to join us on our program, Joanne, and thanks so much for that update.
Thanks for having me.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.